Hi guys, this is Samuel at 64. Hope you're looking forward to our review of the grand final of Robot Wars 2016. First thing I need to talk to you about though is something a bit different. It's regarding Alex Brown and TR2. He is running a charity auction with some of the bits and bobs of Robot Wars being sold for charity. Making a lot of money for charity, and links will be in the description for the two pages for Team Toon, their Twitter and their Facebook page, and details will come up as the week goes on. I'm fairly sure it's going to start this week. It might be a bit later. I'm not 100% sure, but honestly, check it out. There's some really, really cool stuff up for grabs if you're willing to give a bit for charity. It's honestly really worth doing. If you want some really cool memorabilia, please go and have a look. It's I really am considering having to try and get a few myself. Honestly, some of the stuff is really cool, and you will not regret checking it out. Also, we mentioned last week about a picture of Chompalot after it was destroyed by Ironside in the group battle. Here it is now, and as you can see here, it's just you can't really get a sense of the scale of the damage that was done to Chompalot. You have the claw ripped off. Obviously, the wings have been taken off purely for like repair purposes, but like the claws all damaged to one side, and the chassis itself has just kind of been bent out of shape. It's all lopsided. Complete devastation. Honestly, complete devastation. Anyway, enough about last week. Time to get on with the grand final. Hope you enjoy it. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Sam Elliott 64, and I'm joined alongside
Anderson 9132 yet again.
And it's time for the grand final of Robot Wars reviewed. We have two guests once again this week. No Dave, he's busy travelling and he's absolutely shattered, so I can understand him completely not being here for this one. But we have another David Briggs. Hello, David.
Hello.
Good friend of myself and Anderson's. We've known him for many, many years. And we have an actual grand finalist with us. Will Thomas of Team Shock. Hello, Will.
Hi, guys.
And as ever, it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us. Well done.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Anyway, we're here obviously to discuss the grand final, and I think there's not really much to discuss prior to that except for the wild card. I think for the most part, everyone was kind of expecting it to be Thor, not the fact that it was going to be, it was shown in the kind of preview teaser things in the early series. We kind of had to try and dumb that down a little bit, but that was a shame that they showed it off quite early on. But realistically, it was obviously going to be Thor, wasn't it? Come on.
Yeah. I personally think. I think we should all discuss who else we thought it could have been. I personally think that the other robot that was probably the second to being the wild card was probably Gabriel, because it was the only robot to make it to a whole judge's decision, and it was also a very dominant robot in its heat.
Yep, David, do you think it was going to be Thor the whole time, or was it just
Personally, I think the three clear wins through the head-to-heads, I think that gave Thor a strict advantage, and yeah, overall it just seemed to perform so much better. There was no chaotic battles from it. It seemed straightforward, smash and bash anything it came across. Yeah, I agree with Anderson to a degree. I think Gabriel as well was a very close second for that. But otherwise, I would say, yeah, Thor was the obvious choice.
Was it the same for you? Well, do you think that, like, going into it, were you expecting it to be Thor all the time, or was it a case of there were others that you thought, it could be them as well?
Yeah, personally, I wanted it to be Thor, because I'd have quite liked to have had another one-on-one with them, sort of with both of us working at full power.
So you could have a decider.
Yeah, that's it. So I had the final of the best of three. But the Roboteers also really rated Gabriel. Those fights were very good, and it did sort of kill two robots. But I don't think that came across quite so much.
Not only has it killed Eric in the live events, but it's now also killed Chompalot as well. It's just got a habit of this, hasn't it?
Gabriel is an excellent machine, and the sword it had on for filming actually took a lump out of the live tour arena as well at Manchester.
Oh, really?
So they can't actually run that version of Gabriel anymore. They have to tone it down.
That's crazy.
So it's a hell of a machine.
That is really crazy. Obviously we'll get to that moment in a second, but obviously you don't normally expect a robot on the live tours with without spinners and stuff to take chunks out of the arena like that. That's kind of crazy. So,
and people said black bots were outdated.
I know, it's crazy. Anyway, the matter at hand, the grand final. So Thor gets the wild card, and straight in there with TR2 and Pulsar. This, for me, was really, really quite interesting because the Activate was called. None of them moved. They just sat still and they all waited to see what each other was going to do. And that struck me as really quite interesting because like none of them were like eager to go out there and say, "Oh, I'm going to boss this fight." They were all as nervous as each other. That come across really quite interestingly.
I agree, and it was a very interesting fight because they seem to both leave Pulsar alone and just seem to really go for one another. Thor and TR2 seem to just go for one another. Really, Pulsar, they just sort of seem to think we ain't going near that. Bye, leave it to do its own thing. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, its own thing ended up being it breaking down. But yeah, it was a very interesting. Obviously, I don't know. I don't want to completely quote this, but I have a suspicion maybe they were both a little bit tentative with Pulsar because, well, that thing sounded like a helicopter taking off.
Yeah.
And so they were just trying to maybe just feel each other out a little bit and maybe then go for Pulsar after it had gotten weakened down throughout the match. I'm not too sure. But it was still a good fight. It was only really made a good fight by those two, though, because obviously Pulsar didn't really get going much before it broke down.
Throughout the whole competition, we saw Pulsar struggling with various issues, and I think once again those technical gremlins coming back to haunt them. Would you know any more about that? Will, was it a case of Pulsar struggling to fix itself more or less?
Yeah, Pulsar was, I think, the main victim of the very tight time frame.
Yeah.
So they were originally meant to be in episode 2 alongside us.
Yeah.
But they had a lot of radio interference problems. It would work fine in the test arena because that's so much closer to the robot. Mm. As soon as you go into the main arena with all the lights and the cameras working, they were really suffering to the point they had to try and poke the antenna from the receiver through the robot to try and even get some signal.
Oh, wow.
Some real issues with that. And ultimately, I think they never really got going in that final fight, which was a shame because it could have made for a really interesting match.
Honestly, I think it's another case of had it been fully working, Pulsar could have really gone on and possibly gone on to the final. Obviously, we won't know. It's all a bit what if sort of thing, but it seemed like it had the potential to do it. It just didn't have the grip, if you like. It just didn't have the absolute robustness to go on and win the fights, which is a bit of a shame, but these things happen in Robot Wars, unfortunately. David, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think going on that what if scenario, I think Pulsar, to be fair, being tentative has its advantages, and of course, both the TR2 and 4 could easily have been completely thrown over by the vertical spinning blades. I mean, that was fantastic in their heat against Ironside. I thought, considering Ironside's blade was angled so it could hit low robots, I wondered the effect that it'd have on Pulsar, and Pulsar, of course, with the vertical spinning drums. It was a really impressive weapon, and it seems such a shame that it would have all those problems throughout its heat, and then ultimately at the grand final seemed to be such a disappointment. Not to mention it has a really nice name as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's just just looking at it as well. We didn't really mention it last week, but it just looks stunning. It's just from just like an aesthetic point of view, it's really nice, and it's really compact. It just looks great. It just looks great, and it's just such a shame that we didn't get to see the best of it. I don't think this time around, but
it's what I like to call like one of those little surprises in a little package, like Onslaught and Arnold A. It's a small little robot, but it packs a mean punch. And I also would like to say good credit to them because despite the fact that they didn't really work much, they still were able to do quite a heck of a lot of damage to Thor, despite not even working properly.
And TR2, I mean, really, they
and to TR2, I mean, they ripped their front wedge a bit, didn't they? So
that looked a bit tasty, didn't it? But that's one of those things, and I hope we see Pulsar again. I'm fairly sure we will, and hopefully we'll see it at 100%. And they'll be hard to beat when it's fully working. And unfortunately for them, this series it wasn't meant to be. So going out there where Pulsar, through go TR2 and Thor, the wild card, making the most of their second chance now. Will, this is your time to shine. Take it away. You in there with Carbide and Apollo. God help you. Off you go. What did you think of this fight?
Yeah, I mean, this was always going to be the toughest fight for us because right from the off, everyone sort of rated Apollo and Carbide as being probably the best two in the series. And when the news came through that we were drawn to fight them, we thought, okay, if we're going to get through this one, we'll have definitely earned it.
Yeah.
And it was a case of pretty much go for Carbide and see what happens, really.
That's not really the tactic like you normally expect. Oh, let's see that big spinny thing. Let's go for that.
Yeah, I mean the other fights were the other fight was quite laid back, and everyone was a bit tentative to start off with. But we thought, oh no, we're not going to do that. If we're gonna get them, it's going to be before they spin up, because we know that was a problem they were having, and to an extent it worked. But,
well, as I say, like
a few fights they were at maximum power for.
In fairness, for the first few seconds, like you got underneath, you were pushing them around. I thought, hello, what's happening here? You got a great start, and then they hit the arena wall, they bounced into you, and that was all she wrote, really, wasn't it? That was game over.
It was quite an unlucky hit, really, because if it had hit the wheel next to it, it would have taken out just that wheel, and because that was the slave wheel and not the main driven one, we'd have still had 3 out of 4 wheels. So we'd have
bit like in the heats then.
Pretty much. I think we had at least 2 fights where we were running on just 3 wheels. But due to the nature of Shockwave, it didn't really matter a huge amount. It meant it was slightly more sluggish to turn, but that was about it. So if we'd have hit the other side, we could have carried on. But what they don't show is that cease was actually called quite a bit after the wall had been damaged. As we kind of stopped and went, oh, what's going on there? We had the production crew come in, and no one really knew what was going on. And eventually cease was called, and by that time the damage had already been done, and there was nothing we could do about it.
Say, it was it's pretty spectacular damage on the back right. I mean, it's just completely gone. Really, there's nothing left of it, was there?
Yeah, in one hit, pretty much, it peeled away the whole side plate, and that's 4mm Weldox. So it's really
that's some serious stuff.
We're getting on for sort of armored car level.
Wow.
Sort of material on here, and it peeled it back in one complete hit. And at the same point, pulled the wheel out, and of course we lost both the chains in that hit as well. And that was kind of that, really. But everything inside was still working, so both motors were working, the lifter was still running. And in the end, I think it was about an hour and a half to get it back into fighting form.
Oh wow, that's actually really quite quick, because you had obviously a time limit. In theory, had the other two suddenly died, you could have carried on then in that case.
Yeah, it was looking like when Apollo had their fight, we could have, when they got sort of hit by Carbide, we could have got called back in.
Oh really?
Why we were kept around just to be ready in case.
Oh wow.
But in the end, we ended up doing a couple of whiteboard fights, which were quite fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think myself, Anderson, and David will all agree. You've had a phenomenal series. I mean, I think nobody really expected you to go and beat Thor in the heat final. You managed to do it, and
yeah, I mean, we didn't really expect that either. To be honest, when we saw the draw for round 1, we thought, okay, probably that's it. We're going home.
I was like, when we said
with 2 broken fingers, don't forget.
Oh yeah,
yeah, that was not my finest moment. Dropping a robot in my hand, but I won't do that again. That's for sure.
When we did your whole heat review, we said that your first round was all 4 of you could have probably gone on and won that heat had things gone their way.
Yeah, I think it was pretty much lucky.
Yeah, did you think that?
Yeah, it depends who hit who first, I think. If Disconstructor had hit us around the back, we could have had a repeat of what Carbide did. They're definitely right up there in terms of spinner power, and if Tough as Nails had kept working, they hadn't had the link fall out, it could have been a very different fight, and that could have changed completely how that heat went. So we would definitely had a bit of luck on our side, and we went a lot further than we thought we ever would, especially with a brand new machine.
I was going to say, well, I mean, you've been around for forever, really, in terms of the live events, but this is something completely new, and because you're mostly CO2 flippers, aren't you? And this is something very original for the TV Robot Wars, anyway. And it was an amazing first series for Shockwave. Well done.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, Shockwave's the only thing that we could get on the show with. We applied with Manta and Maelstrom, our normal live event machines, but because they're fairly standard wedge flippers, they were a bit too samey with everything else. Yeah. Quite similar to Apollo and TR2, and we put Shockwave in as something different. And in the end, when they said, "Yeah, we quite like it," we thought, "Right, we've got 5 weeks now to
let's do it then."
If I might add,
it was a long 5 weeks, but we got there in the end.
If I might add, it does seem a little bit ironic that, considering how samey the producers didn't want so many flippers on, the overall winner has to be the flipper, doesn't it?
Oh, of course it does. Yeah, it would be. But I mean, at the same time, we've seen the effectiveness of the flippers for years, and unfortunately, you got a pretty horrific draw. I think of the 6 finalists, you probably picked the worst 2 to get. I mean, possibly if you had Pulsar in there with you as well, it could have been worse.
Yeah, I think if we'd had anyone other than Carbide, we'd have probably made a much better fight for it. We may still have gone out, but I think if we'd had anyone else, we'd have probably kept going for 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And we might have had the chance of getting someone in the pits, but it wasn't to be, sadly.
Yeah, it's one of those things, unfortunately. And as we've said, I'm fairly sure if there is a series 2, you're going to be one of the ones to beat, as well. It's I bet
before we started on the new machine, in anticipation of a second series.
Excellent. That's what we'd like to hear.
So it'll be a completely separate robot to Shockwave. So it's going to be Aftershock.
I like it. I like it.
One through.
Yeah, absolutely. The branding is strong. Right. So sadly, for Will anyway.
You haven't heard David's input on the match.
Ignore me, David. Take us through this.
Or mine, actually, for that matter. Sorry.
Go on, off you go. David, over to you.
Oh, great. Yeah, I think if anything to pick out, let's just ignore how horrific the hit was. I find it more amazing that despite ripping off the arena panel, how many millimeters of thickness the steel arena side was, the fact that it still had enough energy to then rebound and catch you. I mean, that was pretty intense. So it just says a lot about Carbide, but at the same time, I do think it's amazing. At the same time, head-on hit. If you're lifting scoop, it deflects the blade straight away. Whereas we've seen TR2s, not TR2, sorry. TR2 in the later round. Yeah, TR2's flipper blade had it torn by the blade head-on. So there's a really good design that you put forward there, and hopefully it'd be great to see Shockwave 2 in the second series, potentially, with an up-armoured sides, maybe.
a little bit extra on the sides. Anderson?
Yeah, a very good fight. Very short, but very sweet. I was a little bit disappointed with how short it was, because this looked like the match of the... This looked like it had the potential to be the match of the episode, because it was really 3 of my favourite machines from the series. And honestly, I could see each and every one of you being strong against each other and weak to each other as well. So it was honestly it was the only fight of the series where I didn't actually have a clue who was going to come out as the winner. I could think to myself, okay, for example, I had a suspicion Killy Cranky would lose in that match, or I have a suspicion Mr. Speed Squared would lose here, or I have a suspicion that Apollo will win this one. But this was literally a case of I had absolutely no idea, and it was a bit of a shame to see it go over so quickly. But hey, that's Robot Wars, isn't it? End of the day, lads. So shame about how quickly and how how upsettingly it ended for Shockwave. But at the end of the day, it's Robot Wars. It was a good match for how long it lasted, and it was just very enjoyable all around.
I mean, we can see on your face, when in the arena, you were obviously very disappointed with seeing, Shockwave beaten like that. I mean, I'm sure you'd have loved to carry on and just, at least try again, but wasn't to be this time, unfortunately for you, was it?
Yeah, at one point there was talk that since we'd been hit after the arena, we'd been damaged, that we might have had time to repair. So we were sort of already thinking ahead, can we fix it in time? And I think if that had been the case, we would have probably got it back together.
Yeah.
But as I said, it was unlucky we got hit on that particular wheel. If it had been the other side, we'd have been able to carry on in some form.
That's crazy. Like, it's just one of those small things that sometimes go for you, sometimes go against you, but out go Shockwave, and through go Carbide and Apollo to the head-to-heads. Now, this fight in particular was pretty crazy, wasn't it? Carbide and Thor, goodness me. I mean, I just, watching that fight back, I've seen it a couple of times now just to, try and... You can't really analyse it. It's just brutal. It's bullying, isn't it? It just, you got Thor trying to come in, doing their best to try and slow the bar down, which is obviously what you're meant to do, try and stop it from spinning up, make sure it doesn't get to full power. And it doesn't even matter. Carbide is just ripping things off like it's just not even funny.
It was a shame not to be able to see Jason use his big sharp pointy thing. But in all honesty, it was one of those matches where this was one of those matches which literally shocked me. I'm not going to lie, like my chin hit the floor because whilst Carbide was pretty powerful in the heats, it was riddled with problems. This and the last match were literally the times where we really saw it working properly, and I was just so shocked for two reasons. One, just how deadly Carbide actually proved to be, and two, the fact that Thor was able to keep coming back after such punishment relentlessly. So big credit to both teams, both drivers, and both robots for that one.
Absolutely. I mean, just like I can't really comprehend how much damage was done to that thing. I mean, you've probably got a better idea than we do. Well, what was it like? What was it like trying to like watch that come back in like a mess? Was it just a mess or?
Yeah, because we all watched the fight, we actually stood up in the audience. We wanted to see these fights sort of firsthand. So we were standing up with the crowd, and as soon as this fight was over, we all rushed back to the pit so we could be there when it came back to the bench. And the first thought that Jason had was it's completely wrecked. There wasn't a single panel straight anymore. I think it had lost both sides of the drive. That the entire back end of the robot had just disintegrated. The front plate had been smashed off, and we all looked at it, and originally we thought, this has had it. But it was only when he started really delving into it, everything in the centre section still survived.
Yeah.
And the bits that were broken on the outer pieces were he had spares of. And it took the effort of, there must have been at least sort of 15, 16 Roboteers who all pitched in with either parts or lending a hand. But eventually he got back in there. And in fact, one of the nice touches is the rear axe stop that was made actually came from the tyre that Thor hit in our head-to-head.
Oh, no way! So
that's one of Shockwave's tyres he had sort of.
Oh wow, that's great! I love that. So the one that he destroyed earlier ended up being on his robot later on. That's great.
Yeah, it's when we're going. Has anyone got like a bit of rubber we could use to stop the axe as it goes back to absorb the impact? I mean, actually, yeah, we've got a tyre.
It's got a spare tyre. That's great. I love that. David, what did you think of Thor and Carbide?
Yeah, I mean,
just
takes you back to the days of Splinter getting taken to pieces by Hypnodisc, but possibly in a less brutal way. I think slightly more kinder, because you could see at the end, just as the countdown was being put in place.
Yeah, they didn't.
Carbide was tempted to do what Typhoon did to Atomic at the end of the semi-finals in the 7th series, but instead Carbide from let's keep something there for the later fights, which is more gracious and honourable.
One of the things about this format, like if this was a regular grand final, obviously it would just be like head-to-heads, and then the grand final, the group, like the head-to-heads, like mini league sort of thing, the round robin. It kind of, you have to leave a little bit for later on, because you can't just completely wipe out someone. It's just not on. You can't do that. I mean, I know the Roboteers wouldn't do that anyway, just out of respect. You wouldn't just like completely obliterate something beyond repair. There's like not intentionally anyway. I think it was good of Carbide just to inflict enough damage until it stopped working, and then that's it. Just leave it alone and just let it do its thing in the corner, because Thor was already dead at that point, wasn't it? That was the grand final over for Thor. At that point, I think there was no, realistically, unless Apollo and TR2 just died, there was and fell into a very big black hole. There was no way in hell that Thor was going to ever come back in that final. It was just the luck of the draw. If Thor had gone against Apollo and TR2 first, maybe then it could have gone through. But because it drew the short straw and got Carbide first, that was it.
Yeah, that was just. I mean, what a straw to hold. Paul. I mean, I honestly do feel bad for Jason, bless him, because especially when he did his little, again, the intro saying after all these years of trying to really love to win Robot Wars, I can't help but feel a little bit bad for him, because he just seems so. I mean, when you think about it as well, he is world number 2 technically.
Yeah.
So I
think that one of the best things.
I feel so bad for him, bless him.
One of the best things that I remember back to the heat, he was saying, if it comes out trash, I'm going to be so upset. On his face in the control pod, he just sees Carbide just knocking things off Thor. You just see his face drop. It's such a shame to see, but like,
you kind of see in his eyes that he knew it was over there and then.
yeah,
I mean, like you could just see he was already planning for next year, which is something nice to see. And he was still jolly about it, which is the main thing.
absolutely. You know,
Huge credit to him for that.
it was a great. At the end of the day, it was a great show to see. Like two top teams, top two robots just going for it, and ultimately one has to lose, and that one this time was Thor. So Carbide pick up 3 points. Thor picks up an eternal injury in that format anyway. Next up was TR2 and Apollo. Now this for me was decided in the group stages. TR2 had the nick at the front in their wedge, didn't they, from Pulsar? And after that point, they had to weld a bit of plate on, and they didn't have the ground clearance to get underneath Apollo, and couldn't fight it. Then it was always a case of Apollo was just too low to the ground, and TR2 couldn't get the ground clearance underneath and fight them, essentially.
Yeah, the damage to their arm was actually quite significant, because even though it only looked like a sort of small hit from Pulsar, it actually sort of twisted the flipper arm and the frame.
Yeah.
So even though it didn't look too much sort of on camera during the fight, the damage was fairly hefty, which is why they had to completely build a new front end to it. And in the time allowed, that wasn't really enough to sort of help them out with Apollo, which was still running pretty flat at that point.
Yeah. I mean, with TR2 in this fight, I mean, it was, again, really unlucky when they tried to self-right, and it just got stuck in that position of, like, there's no way back. I remember a while ago, I remember seeing a live event with Ripper self-righted into some of the catch fencing, and he got stuck on the catch fencing, which was
it's the unluckiest way to lose.
Yeah, like self-right, and you just get stuck in the position where you can't flop back down and self-right again, and not on your wheels. It's perfect balance. It was great.
I don't know. Just Disco Inferno in Series 4 was pretty unlucky. Literally a black cable turning its switch off. I mean, that is just daft. That is so unfair.
It is a bit daft. But I mean that fight again was awesome. I mean, every single fight in this grand final was epic in its own right. But this one, I mean, Apollo just kept on TR2. They almost had it out of the arena 2 or 3 times as well. You know, the power of Apollo's flipper came through here. You know, you got to really see, you know, what a modern flipper was like. I think at this point, everyone had figured out how to sort out the gas and not make sure it wasn't so cold. And we finally got to see some mega flips. And it was really awesome to see. And Dead Metal took one to the head. You know, TR2 getting launched through the air and bang on the head of Dead Metal. It was a really great fight. You know, these two of the best drivers as well in the series. Obviously, you know, everyone in the final has to be a good driver to got to the final in the first place. But I mean, this was just awesome to watch.
Yeah, I think it showed why Alex is also UK champion at the moment in the live event circuit. But the good thing is this is probably the closest to a live event circuit fighting as you'll see.
Yeah,
the 2 flippers really going at it. And with the CO2, they'd learned that if they took the CO2 bottles up to the green room where we could watch the fights on our screen in the pits, it was a good couple of degrees warmer than in the main part of the warehouse. So everyone was having their gas bottles up there, hugging them to try and
get them to heat up a little bit.
Warm up, damn you! Warm up.
A bit more effective.
Hopefully next year they have some heaters somewhere. You know, just try and somewhere.
Or a better warehouse.
That's Scotland and cold temperatures, etc., etc.
Dave, going March was pretty cold.
It was grim. It really was grim.
What was wrong with London? London was fine.
London was expensive. David, your thoughts on TR2 and Apollo?
Yeah, nothing more hugely to add. You know, the classic flipper versus flipper. You know, the one that for most people that followed the live circuit for years are thinking, "Oh God, could this be any more unoriginal?" But at the same time, you have to appreciate, you know, how far both the design of flipper has evolved since Chaos 2 introduced the CO2 powered flipper, to the extent that it was dominating. Now, the extent that, you know, these both robots have evolved. You know, I can remember seeing the original Tomb Raider in 2010. You know, before it was evolved in the new design, the TR2, and then of course Apollo. I think, you know, before I'll try and keep away from the bias of Apollo a bit, but at the same time, I think Apollo's flipper design seems to be much better, as you saw in the heat against Storm 2, the fact that it's flipper, not just a single blade, the fact that it's curved all the way around, that allows the whole robot to be maneuvered underneath an opponent to the extent that then you can keep the flipper working rather than on a single surface. But at the same time, I thought, it could have still been possible for TR2 to win because they obviously had more gas.
I was gonna say, was it a case of TR2 having more flips and Apollo being more powerful? Would you know about that at all? Or
To be honest, the systems in there are both pretty even.
All
so
right.
they've both got twin buffer tanks, a 100mm bore ram. So they're both generating about the same sort of power.
Mm.
But Apollo uses it in a slightly better way. Their geometry for the arm is a little bit better, I'd say.
Oh, right, okay.
And that allows them to get that sort of bigger flip.
Yeah.
But considering how cold it was there, they both did pretty well. If that in the middle of July, they'd have been throwing things, maybe getting close to throwing them over the higher walls.
I was going to say, I think certain robots probably would have flown over that high wall, given a bit more manoeuvring. But these are the things that happen, I suppose. Time of the year and things didn't really plan out for the people using CO2.
It's a landmark to happen for the future.
Yeah,
and out of the way over the big wall.
Yeah, whoever's the first one to do that, they're going to have some serious following, I reckon. But
anyway, I reckon my money be on Iron or 7 for that one. If they
you think
get
so?
it next time, because that's a phenomenal flipper on that one.
Overdoser
2. We will see. Anyway, TR2 losing their first fight of the series.
What? I haven't had my say yet.
But you don't matter. No, go on. Carry on.
Oh, screw you.
Carry on. Go on.
Well, flipping fantastic, tish. But yeah, honestly, great fight. I was a bit like David. I was a little, oh god, live circuit 101. Here we go. But I was pleasantly surprised. It was entertaining as hell. Great stuff. A bit unlucky of a loss for Alex there, who was a TR2 getting stuck. But I've no offense to Alex or TR2 or anything like that. I do think Apollo was winning the fight, even though that happened.
It was on
top, yeah. And I'll just say this as well: excellent driving from both teams.
Absolutely. So, as I said, sorry, Anderson. TR2 losing their first fight of the series, and Apollo picking up all 3 points, putting them joint top with Carbide, who they fight next. And there really isn't much to discuss with this fight because it was one hit and that was game over.
It was very anticlimactic, wasn't it?
I mean, Carbide went in a little bit, which is quite cool to see. I mean, a bit naughty, but less said about that the better. I think it was all in. They knew they weren't going to do any major damage to Apollo. Well, actually, no. Will, you said they did take quite a bit of damage. Did you know how much was done to it, or?
Yeah, when it came out the fight, it was. Apollo had a complete slice taken down one side completely.
Yeah.
And it just about missed the drivetrain. If it had been maybe about 2 centimeters lower, it would probably been completely beyond repair.
Wow.
But it had to have a load of welding done. And at one point, as soon as they came out, they thought, this might not go back in, which is why we were sort of called upon. But I think the reason that Carbide inflicted so much damage was they were thinking ahead slightly, because they knew there's a good chance they could be fighting Apollo in the final. And if they could inflict a little bit extra damage there and wreck them, they might have an easier time later on.
So it was like, it was all very tactical. That's actually really interesting because, again, back to the, one of the good things about the round robin is, you can soften someone up for later on, sort of thing. In like as we saw with Carbide and Behemoth in their respective battles. Apollo did exactly the right thing. They went straight for Carbide, stopped them spinning, but didn't stop them spinning enough.
Yeah, at this point, Carbide was still working at full power.
Yeah.
And it's hard to imagine the kind of energy that's being put through a robot when it gets hit by a bar like that. So it's quite easy for something like the link to fall out. I think that was eventually what happened.
Yeah.
But it's a relatively easy thing to solve for the next time.
Yeah, ultimately, Apollo just it got hit and then it stopped working, and that was the end of Apollo. Obviously, David's not here currently, so we will move on to.
He's not here currently, Dave. What's happened to David?
He's busy doing something. He just messaged me. Anyway, we'll move on to Zombie Thor and TR2, and this was a gag. It was bullying, wasn't it? It really
It
was.
was just a
Because
mercy killing, really, wasn't it? I mean, what I love, right, is you have TR2 attempting to get out of the arena all this time, and then Matilda just thinks, you know what, screw it, you ain't gonna do it. I'll just end it for it. Bless it.
Yeah,
Get out. Go on.
yeah,
So long. Thanks for coming, Jace.
at this point, Thor. It looked like when you have like a beloved pet, you've had it for years and years and years. At this point, it's now blind and deaf, struggling to hobble around the floor. This is what Thor is. Thor is the very old beloved pet, and it looked very sad in the arena. I have to say, it was really quite gutting to see. But these things happen, and it never stood a chance. Again, back to what I said earlier. Carbide really ended Thor's series, didn't it, with its fight?
I tell you what, right, again, massive credit for Jason Judge actually good at moving again.
Yeah.
And something half representing what it was but after his last match. But what I will also say here is that, I mean, again, a massive credit also to Thor, because it just would not die. It would stop moving and then get back to moving again. It would be flipped over and its axe would just about manage to just knock it back onto its wheels. It would then get flicked over. Gas was leaking out. I thought, yeah, that's it. Game over. It's no longer going to get back over. And it just about rocked itself back over again. It's just like, how is this thing still doing this? It just... Jason, mate, honestly, you are in the wrong profession, my man. You need to be doing something with tanks or something to help us, get world domination, because that thing just wouldn't die. Honest to God, it was like my oldest sister with a hangover, right? It honestly, it was like that little, it was like the underdog in those like films you see, the underdog who never gives up. And it made me smile and it made me happy. And honestly, mate, Jason, you should be proud of yourself for being able to make a robot that can take as much punishment as it did and last as long as it did.
I don't think there's much more to add to
that. Sorry, Will.
No, I mean, by the time it got to that fight, Jason definitely had the Roboteers on his side. We were all sort of willing it to last the fight, just to take it to the judges. Because I think, if anything, he should have got the decision just for lasting that long against a robot like TR2.
Just for the sake of it, we'll give it to Thor, why not?
But just...
but the real winners of Heat A.
Yeah, I mean, again... Thor was in no fit state to fight, realistically, was it? It was game over, and so it proved TR2, just controlling the fight, and eventually Matilda getting her second out of the arena of the series. She currently holds the record, so Roboteers need to step it up a little bit.
Roboteers, sort it, yeah.
Not again. So that's 3 points for TR2. Thor once again picking up nothing, and now, in my opinion. My humble opinion, this is the fight of the series. TR2 and Carbide. What a battle this was. I mean, it was great. I mean, TR2 getting absolutely battered at the start, panels being ripped off, the front wedge just sliced straight through it. And then Carbide stopped working. Then from then on, Alex just absolutely took control of the fight and just would not let Carbide alone. And I'm very fortunate for Carbide that they didn't end up in the pit. Also very fortunate at the end of the fight, they were pinned against the arena wall. If that happened 3 seconds earlier, TR2 would have won by a KO.
Yes.
So how would that have worked? Because then there'd have been 3 teams on 6 points. How would that have worked? Would it have gone to a judge's ruling? Would you know how that would work, Will?
I was just trying to think. I don't think there was a ruling for it. I think what was sort of rumoured in the pits that there could have been a 3-way final in that case, if it had been a case that everyone had beaten everyone else.
And then Thor obviously with nothing, but...
Yeah, so it could have ended up a 3-way between TR2, Apollo and Carbide.
That would have been awesome.
Title, which would have been a hell of a final, definitely.
Oh, God, yeah. But, I mean, that was where we saw, a lot of people throughout the series have said, Alex's driving has been spectacular. This was just the absolute pinnacle. It really was. And, the amount of fights that they've done, and for them to say, oh yeah, this is the one that, this is the best one we've ever done. They must have done hundreds and hundreds of, I spoke to Alex briefly the other day and I said, how you must be one of the ones that have fought the most on the live tours. You're there all the time. And for that one to stand out above all the others, that's got to be mean a hell of a lot. It says quite a lot that this is the one against Carbide that is the pinnacle. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, Alex drove the perfect fight.
Yeah.
He kept hitting it long enough to break the weapon on Carbide, and then from there, as soon as the bar stopped, he knew that he was in control. I mean, he could have quite easily, once he saw the top panel fly off after the first sort of hit, he could have then completely lost it. But he's been doing this long enough to know what he's doing and keep composed and just take the fight to Carbide, and that's exactly what he needed to do. And we all thought he's just going to get him down the pit because I was actually sitting in the front row of the audience for this one, up in the crowd.
Yeah.
We couldn't believe how it was going.
It was crazy. I mean, Carbide was very fortunate. They just had enough maneuverability just to keep it away from the pit. They kept driving towards, I think it was Shunt CPZ. They kept driving that way, and it ultimately that's what kept them in, and probably what won them the place in the final.
Yeah, it was incredibly tactical from Dave driving Carbide. If they'd had a lower wedge at the back, they might have had more of a fight with TR2, and they thought they might have a better chance if they were up the right way, which is why they kept driving.
Yeah, they kept driving onto the flipper, didn't they?
I mean, I think in total they must have done that about 6 or 7 times. It just
crazy.
never seemed to go their way, and as soon as they were back up the right way, they'd be turned straight back over by TR2 or Shunt, as the case may be.
Yeah.
But, it was a fantastic fight to watch.
Oh yeah, it was. Like I said, dare I say it? Is that the best battle of all time in Robot Wars? TV Robot Wars. I mean, for me at least.
I wouldn't say of all time, but of the series, it's definitely up there because, I mean, I'm going to say this now. There's 2 reasons why I love this match. Right? One, it is probably the closest it's been to a 50-50 match. Right? Because literally, the first half was all Carbide, the second half was all TR2. It is literally as close as it gets to 50-50. And of course, all the action in the arena was absolutely amazing. And then the second reason is, well, I've already told Will this. He's a personal hero of mine because he's an amazing driver, and I respect. In my opinion, driving is one of the most important, if not the most important thing of robot combat. So, of course, seeing a 15-year-old Alex do that as well. Alex is a personal hero of mine because I think it's every kid's dream, isn't it? We're growing up with Robot Wars to one day be able to drive your own robot.
Yeah, of course.
And the fact that this kid is 15, he is living out the dream of driving his own robot and doing it so well and being such a much better driver than people who are, 15, 16, 17, 18 years older than him in some cases. And I just think to myself, he's an honest hero to any young roboteer. And this was the pinnacle proof of that, the driving that he did in this fight. So he is a hero of mine. I know it's a bit weird having a 15-year-old as your hero when you're 22. I know. But honestly, yeah, Alex, you're getting a thumbs up from me, although you can't see it. So yeah, but honestly, this fight, it's between this and the grand final battle for me for best fight of the series.
I was going to say, we'll get to that in a second, but yeah. For me, it was this one for me, but that is very close. But ultimately, we have a winner in TR2, but only via the judges, which means 2 points. They're on 5. Carbide remain on 6 and are already through to the grand final. And some more bullying for Thor was in order. Zombie Thor had to have one more fight, and the whole... It was amazing. Every single fight, something new came off Thor. And this time it was the whole backside of Thor, and that was where all the electronics are based, and that was it was put out of its misery finally, and Thor, yeah, Thor was finally put out of its misery.
I was a little bit gutted that it was only one flip that did it, because at the end of the day, it's put up with so much more punishment and managed to crawl its way back into life. I was a little disappointed, but at the same time, I was kind of relieved just because that meant that Jason could put it in the back of the van, whatever it is he brings it, in the back of the van. Go home, have a nice cup of tea, and just... that's
the end of Thor, Mark. I mean, Will, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I think Jason must have been the hardest working roboteer in the pits. He was there for hours rebuilding that thing, and it would come out. You had to spend the next sort of 4 hours rebuilding it and getting it back in again. And I think there was a sense of relief once he'd finished that fight, thinking, it's all over, it's done.
It's finally dead, I can get rid of it.
Or it kind of just shed all of its armour, thinking, right, I've had enough.
And it's a one-man team as well. He's a one-man team and he's done it all himself, so he deserves even more praise. It's like, it reminds me a lot of Peter Gibson, actually, from with Wheelosaurus from the original series.
Yeah.
Just one guy in his shed banging around and making something. Of course, unlike Peter Gibson, he's managed to make something actually capable of fighting. That's no disrespect, of course, to Peter Gibson. He's a hero, in my opinion, to Robot Wars, just because he proves that just strapping some old-fashioned stuff by yourself, you can still enter into Robot Wars. But obviously, I think Thor is on a whole new level to that because he's actually managed to make something grand final worthy and keep fighting the way it did after how much damage it took, whilst being a one-man team.
It was honestly like Thor was given the wild card, obviously, because it won all of its fights leading up to the heat final. Obviously, Will ended that streak. Well done. But it certainly proved it was worthy of its wild card, and fourth place for Thor, which is a far cry of where it's finished in the previous series. Obviously, on the live circuit, it's been vastly more successful than it ever was in the actual TV show. But fourth place in Robot Wars was stellar for an axe robot, which again we said a couple of times before, axe robots aren't that commonplace these days. Not many effective ones.
And
they're very hard to get right.
Yeah,
and I think as proven by Jason, he's been sort of plugging away at this for years and years, and he's now got to the point where the actual axe mechanism of Thor is probably the best one out there. I'd say it's better than Terahertz. And I know that since we've been sort of finished filming the show, he's been building a new Thor, and I believe it's almost ready to make its debut. And if it's anything like this current one, it's going to be spectacular.
Oh, absolutely. Watching it around the arena throughout the whole of this series, Thor was just, it glides. It was just really stunning to watch. It was really, it was like it was dancing. It was really just like the way it went around the arena was brilliant. And I think we can all agree that we're excited to see where Thor goes from here. This version was pretty spectacular, and it's only going to get better.
Yeah, this one was capable of winning, and I think had it had a different order in the round robin and fought Carbide last, it could have well been in the final.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that could have made for a very different show, but unfortunately luck wasn't on Jason's side. But I think everyone can agree that it was a fantastic performance and a brilliant robot.
Absolutely, and TR2, coming third. This was at the very, very start. This was my tip to win the series. Wasn't quite meant to.
Mine.
Only just, but yeah. We didn't even mention that we our two tips fought each other.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Anyway,
they did, didn't they?
Yeah.
Sorry,
anyway, but yeah, TR2 for me was for me the one that was going to go on and win this. And Alex can hold. They were saying before. I think there was their fight with Thor. He can hold his head high. Absolutely, he can. He is. Driven the absolute socks off that thing. His bits knocked off it at the end as well. It wasn't. Realistically, if they had gone through, it probably wouldn't have lasted very long against Carbide the second time. But a huge congratulations to Alex and obviously Clive and Wendy as well for getting that thing. Third place for in a competition where there's been machine built things and workshop and lab built things, and this is built in the garage, and it's come third.
Yeah, I think that's a testament to Alex's driving more than anything.
Yeah,
because I've always been a firm believer of a very good driver, even with a lesser robot, will win, and that's not saying that.
I agree. I 100% agree with that.
Yeah,
I think. Even in our case, Shockwave isn't necessarily the best engineered robot or the most powerful or destructive, but on the odd occasion when I drove it remotely well, it performed well.
Well, you only nearly you only nearly ended up in the pit once, so that's something at least.
That was the scariest moment.
You had a bit of a power slide. That was pretty cool. But yeah, as you said,
I wrote a big nipper.
I was saying they were determined to go down that pit. But yeah, TR2 was a robot for me that it wasn't the most spectacular in the way it fought, but it was just solid, and it kept running and running and running. And it only lost one fight in the whole series, and that was to Carbide. And it was to Apollo, sorry. And there's no disrespect in that at all. It was just unlucky on the day that it just couldn't quite self right. And
I think that fight was always going to be 50-50.
Yeah,
I don't think anyone could have called that going in. And in fact, Alex and I were having this discussion not that long ago. If you'd fought that fight several times over,
it'd be a different result every time.
Yeah, exactly. So it's one of those ones you can never predict how that particular one was going to go.
Yeah, I mean, again, it would all have ended if TR2 hadn't had the damage from Pulsar and things like that as well. It would have been completely different again. But with that said, TR2 third place. That, as I said, there were live circuit champions coming into this, and again, that's a place where spinners aren't allowed and other things, etc., etc., other permutations. Third place is spectacular, and TR2 definitely have to see them again. I mean, I'm sure we will, but I've worked out the reason why they couldn't win the series. They didn't have the bum axe. The bum axe was taken off for the grand final, and it let them down. You see?
Well, it let them down. In all fairness, when their bloody match, oh no, it didn't. I'm talking absolute rubbish. Don't worry, something different that got them stuck, wasn't it? On against the ball. Don't worry, ignore me. I'm a tit.
I think that was the tactical move, though. If they took off the bum axe, it would make sure they could definitely self-right, because they weren't too sure. They'd never tested it. And going into the grand final, the last thing they wanted to do was be stuck upside down, unable to self-right.
Oh wow!
Yeah, the only thing worse than not having the bum max was to put an England flag on it. If they put an England flag on it, it would have had no hope.
It's very true. And now, the big one, the grand final, Apollo and Carbide again. This was really interesting from a perspective of they were both broken at the end of the fight. They were not healthy. They you say in series gone past, robots like, I don't know, say Tornado and Razor, and in those series, in the earlier series, 9 times out of 10 they could probably go back in again and probably have another fight afterwards. These two were just completely mashed. Like Carbide's weapon wasn't working; it was just kind of limping around. Apollo's flipper was jammed open and bent and buckled, and it had this for me. Reminded me a lot of this is what should have been between Chaos 2 and Hypnodisc. A really close fight between the best 2 robots in the series, in my opinion.
When Dara said it was like a boxing match, it honestly felt like
they were just slugging at it. They were just there was nothing left to
round.
give.
Yeah, it was the 8th round, the last round. They both were bleeding over their eyes. They were both so knackered they could barely even lift their fists up to just tap each other in the face. They were just barely trudging along, and it felt like a proper fight to the death. And
Absolutely.
I just think that is why I think it's my favourite match of this series, and it's definitely up there one of my favourite of all time. Just because it was one of the few matches where both robots actually went to the full.
And there was nothing left to give. They'd given everything. There was nothing else to give, and I think that's what really made it quite special.
Yeah, it felt just like it. It felt like honestly, it felt like literally there was no gap between each battle. Literally, after every battle, they just kept getting thrown in. And that was pretty much it.
Will?
Yeah, I mean, last night was the first time I'd seen the final. I didn't actually get to see this one live.
Oh, really?
And it was it was definitely a worthy final, and it definitely looked like both robots were on their last legs at the end of it, really slugging it out. And it had everything that a final should have. It had that sort of Carbide spinning up. You thought, right, it's going to be a fantastic fight, damage being caused. Then the blade stops and Apollo comes back. So it was a really good final.
Definitely one of the easily. I probably would say this the best grand final matches of the
Oh yeah, I mean comparing to the old series, I mean you can't really do it that much, but by comparison, this is just head and shoulders above everything else, and it was certainly a worthy final, and again the 2 best robots across the series made it, and we were given an absolute treat. And of course, our worthy winners via the judges were Apollo. So the flipper reigns supreme once again. And
yay!
No, it was honestly, it was an absolute, it was a joy to watch. It's amazing when you think that Apollo in the first round barely made it through. They had damage to the wheel. They had problems throughout the heat with the gear, with the gearing, I think was it, or the chain drive on one of the wheels, and then it just progressively every round it just got stronger and stronger, and it ultimately went out and won it. It was kind of it's quite a nice story, really. It started off as a robot that was a bit fragile, and it ended up just winning out in the end.
Yeah, it's like one of those
sports. They didn't just breeze through.
Yeah. It was it was a performance out of this world.
Oh gosh, that was dire. I'm going to cut that out. It was that bad. No,
That was more dire than Banshee's performance in Series 4.
Oh, come on,
wasn't
man. As for Carbide, everyone's favourite to win early on. To me, I don't know. It started very strongly in the grand final, as we saw. Will, obviously you took a bit of a brunt of that in the first round. It started off very strongly, but towards the end, did they sustain damage against TR2 that was lasting? Did you know? Was it a case of they went too hard and then that was they kind of did too much to themselves, or was it just a case of they rebuilt it and it was just unlucky twice?
Yeah, I think it's the nature of Carbide is that it is so destructive to other things, but it also inflicts the same level of energy to itself. And during the heat, they'd already wrecked one motor. Then in the lead to the build up to the grand final, they put another motor in there, and they still hadn't completely solved the initial underlying problem. And after the more sort of fights that went on, the longer the bar kept spinning for, the worse the situation was becoming. So it was unlucky, really. Had they had another spare motor, then it could have been a very different story. I think everything would have been annihilated. That would have made a very different episode. But no, Carbide was one of these machines that everyone expected to do well. When it turned up for the first day of filming, everyone ran over to it because we thought we've got to have a look and see what we're against, and then pray that we're not drawn against it.
And then slowly back away as you realise, oh no, it actually looks really scary. Yeah,
because I sort of heard, Carbide's here, go and have a look, and I immediately regretted it as soon as it looked scary.
Oh no, but again, worthy finalists, and well, the pair of them were. And I think everyone was pretty much in agreement that those two were the top two. Got there in the end. The cream did rise to the top, and we saw a great final, and that's it.
Yeah, for
Robot Wars 2016.
It was far too short.
A good final to end on.
Absolutely,
it was like awesome. Chris Pruitt. It was far too short.
Ah, dear me. Sorry, Chris. Anyway, we
just before we go, are there anything that we would like to see in the new series? If there is a recommission series 2, any changes we'd like to see or anything like that?
We'll start with Will. From a Roboteer's point of view, what things would you like to see change or stay the same? Like what would you like to see coming into Series 2?
I think the main thing would be more competitors. So in my mind, what I'd like to see is maybe 10 heats, and then take each of the heat finalists as a seed, and that gives a sort of a nice, recognisable robot from this time around. Personally, I'd like to be back. We're working on the new robot. It's sort of halfway through building at the moment. So, but
salty.
With maybe another house robot, get Sergeant Bash back.
Yeah, hopefully we can see that.
It's got a good formula this time for making it work.
I mean,
I'd like to see most of it stay the same.
On the whole, I mean, we have to think of this as a new show because it is a new show. On the whole, like this is far, from my point of view, this is probably my third favourite series comparing it to the old ones. Behind 4 and 5, but there's no disgrace in that. 4 and 5 are, in my opinion, just like kind of untouchable. But as a starting point, this has been a fantastic series. There's been, we've seen everything you want to see from Robot Wars. You've seen a few shocks in there, obviously, with early favourites going out. We've seen great sportsmanship. Obviously we saw Chompler getting ripped apart and seen all the teams go and fix that. Same thing with Nuts. The series as a whole is just kind of, like, it started off quite slowly for me. It just kind of kept building and building, and it's just kind of like some kind of unstoppable momentum now. The sky's the limit as far as I'm concerned. I really want to see, as you said, well, next series more competitors would be awesome to see. Maybe a few tweaks to the formula. I'm not a big fan of the whole wild card thing. Hopefully we won't have to see that again. But at the same time, I can understand why it was there in the first place, because it was very constricted on time. It would have been nice to see those 5 go against each other, but I can understand why they didn't do that for timing purposes.
Yeah, I think this time round the wild card was needed because of the number of episodes.
Yeah,
I think maybe with sort of a larger field, they might go back to like the semi-final format and then a grand final at the end of the series, which would be nice to see.
Definitely, absolutely, it would be really nice to see that. I mean, as an episode, Anderson, what is your rating out of 10 for the grand final?
Rating out of 10 for the grand final, 9.95. It's so close to being a 10 out of 10. It can't be a 10 out of 10 because there was a one-hit KO match in there.
Oh, come on.
That is the only reason
You're
why.
worse than Reddit.
Oh yeah, I know. Actually, speaking of Reddit, basically, I can't really say much about what I'd like to improve about the series, apart from what's already been said. I'd like to see more competitors, a longer series. When it comes to, there's only two things I'd really like to mention. One, I'm not a Reddit keyboard warrior when I say this, but the pit needs to be smaller and have smoke come out of it. It's not the pit, there's enough
I
smoke
was going
coming
to
out
say,
of
like,
it.
the smoke aspect just kind of gives like a sort of impression of that's the
Defeat.
end. Do you know what I mean? And
Yes.
I don't mind it without it. I've kind of got used to it, but at the same time, it's like, it would be really nice if it had it.
Yeah, a bit smaller pit because it just makes it a little bit less likely they're going to go in the pit.
It's a bit of theatrics, if you like. You know, it's just something different. You know, but that's just me.
I mean, I must say, I'm quite a fan of the pit as it is.
Yeah.
Oh well.
It worked quite well for me.
Also, you might. Well,
It's disconstructed, isn't it? And also the other thing, like you said, new house robot. But I would rather see a completely new, never before done house robot. I would rather
really?
see an actual brand new house robot that's not been done. I mean, it would be nice to see Sergeant Bash again. My missus, for example, her favourite house robot is Sergeant Bash, and she would love to see it back. But me personally, I would be more inclined to see a brand new house robot, completely new, entirely. But apart from that, I agree with everything you say. So yeah, and like I said, 9.95. If it wasn't for that one-hit KO match, it probably would have been better.
Will, I mean, can you give a rating? I mean, you were in it, so I mean, from your point of view, like, how did you, what did you think of your last hurrah, if you like?
I thought it was the best episode of the series by far. So at least a 9.5 out of 10. It would have been more if we'd got further.
Oh, I see. Oh no.
But it was an excellent show.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed that one.
I
If Shockwave won, it would have been 10 out of 10 people.
That's how it would be for me.
I will actually say just now, right, I actually pegged it down to being Shockwave and TR2 in the final two, so I kind of got that wrong, didn't I? Lol.
If it wasn't for Carbide, it might have been.
It might well have been. I mean, for me, the grand final is at least a 9.5, maybe a little bit higher. But I mean, it was just, it was just non-stop, wasn't it? Every fight threw up something different. It was just great. I mean, you can't really go with much better than that, really. I think that's nicely summed things up. Obviously, Will, thank you very much for joining us. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
And so,
we've got a lot of good stuff lined up in the future for you as well.
Robot Wars 2016 has ended. Where do we go from here? Well, we've got something special for quite a few of the Robot Wars teams. We might have to come back to you at some point again and bug you for a few answers. But if that's all right with you,
that's fine with me.
Brilliant. So that could be coming up. I don't know when that'll happen. That'll happen soon. However, it was announced today being the 29th of August 2016. That BattleBots starts on Sunday. Season 1 starts on Spike in the UK, so we'll be doing reviews of that as well.
Oh, I won't be, unfortunately. I won't be able to.
Yeah, sadly, unfortunately, Anderson isn't with us. So, Anderson, thank you very much for your time as well for this series. It's been an absolute pleasure to review.
I will still guest star in a few of them. I'll be there for the team interviewee thingy. Absolutely. And I'm more than likely going to still be there for all of the original series reviews that we plan to do.
Absolutely.
But BattleBots, unfortunately, I haven't got time to do all of them. So the one that had to drop was BattleBots. It's the one I had the least experience with.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there you go.
But anyway,
we've got a competent replacement, and you'll see who he is whenever they do it.
Absolutely. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching, and goodbye. That's the end of Robot Wars 2016. Hopefully, we'll see you again for Series 2. But until then, I've been Sam at 64.
I've been Anderson 9132.
And thank you very much, Will, for joining us.
Thank you.
Take care. Goodbye, everyone.